Alrighty, welcome on, ladies. Today we have a beautiful guest, Mary, who is joining us from New York. And Mary is a writer and a coach. And if you want to follow on her on Instagram, we'll give all those links below. But she has an incredible page of resources, and her work has such a depth of knowledge and experience. So I'm excited to bring her on. Mary, welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yeah. Can you tell
Yeah.
us more about what you do and who you are as a person?
hmm
Mm.
yeah, in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
I am a coach and I'm also a writer. I'm about to release my first book, which I'm really excited about. My coaching career came about after my divorce. There were a number of things going on in my life leading up to that. Like I've been, as I mentioned earlier, like in therapy since I was very young. My dad's a psychotherapist. When my marriage collapsed and I was also business partners with my ex, so I left my business, my home, my marriage, all the things that are kind of like pillars of identity. And when that collapsed in my life, I realized that the things I know about healing, about being human, they were very intellectual. They lived up here. And I went on a journey to try to integrate more into my body and into a deeper place of knowing
Mm.
how to fix things that are broken, how to heal. I worked with a number of different healers. One of them is a shaman who I studied with. And what I bring to my practice as a coach is sort of this organic gathering of all the different tools and modalities that have served me. So I work with a wide range of people, and I try to employ the things that have worked in my life for real so that I'm not just talking about ideas, but I'm sharing information that I think actually can meaningfully impact people's lives. I
Yeah,
hope that's a I hope that's a decent nutshell. It's hard to put it all into, one quick little soundbite.
absolutely. And I'm sure throughout this interview, we will cover more of that. So I'm excited to jump in. Today, we're
Good.
going to be talking about the subject of, is real love for me? Like, am I ever going to attract it into my life? And for the listeners here, for women that are in affair relationships, you're probably going through these highs and these lows and a lot of pain and then a lot of pleasure, and really unsure of, like, is stability even possible?
Mhm.
And so today, Mary, we're going to ask you lots of questions around healthy love. And I know you've shared before your experience of going through that questioning process yourself. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. There was a time after my divorce where I was alone for maybe the first time in my adult life. Um, and a lot of friends were sort of asking me when I was going to start dating. And so I threw myself into dating, and immediately came up against this kind of crisis of self-worth and feeling like I wasn't meeting anybody that resonated for me. And I wasn't really aware that I still had more stuff that was in the way of me receiving healthy love in my life. I just felt like a certain amount of time had gone by. I was being very linear about it. Like a certain amount of time has gone by. A lot of people in my life were sort of saying like, hey, you should get back in the game. So I was more reacting to other people's ideas and timelines about when it's right to resume
Yeah.
trying to have romantic partnership after a divorce or after the end of a relationship. And so after a short time of dating, I immediately stopped and was like, I can't do this. And I felt like really anxious and not okay. So I
Yeah.
stopped. And that was when I began to understand more about my own belief systems about love,
Yeah.
and that I was living in this inner climate of telling myself like, it's not possible. So I would go out to try to meet people, but really the overwhelming feeling inside of me that I wasn't even conscious of was like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of why I felt anxious a lot, in the beginning of trying to date post-divorce, is because I was trying to do something, but everything in me, it's like pressing the gas, pressing the brake at the
Yeah,
same time.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, I got to get out of this. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Let's like dive into more of that. So the
Mhm.
women that listen to this will either be in an affair dynamic and
Mhm.
or they've come that they're wanting to leave, or they've left and they're wanting to date. How do we know when we're protecting ourselves from receiving healthy love and actually sabotaging ourselves from
Mhm.
receiving that?
Mhm. Well, I think life talks to us all the time. And I think when nothing is gelling and none of the doors are opening and we're in a lot of pain, that's feedback. Like, that's not like, a lot of us think that we're being guided in our lives when things are going well. And when things are going badly, then we're out of step with guidance
Yeah.
and we're sort of like off the path in the wilderness. But truly, I think there's no such thing. I think everything is feedback all the time. So how do you know? Well, I think it comes in the form of pain and suffering.
Mm.
Like, if you're trying to date and it's not happening, like you keep meeting jerks, or you're on your way to go to the date and you're having a nervous breakdown, or everything feels like you're working against resistance. It's not flowing. It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
If you're in a relationship, if you're having an affair, or if you're just in a plain old relationship and it's just the two of you,
Mm.
regardless of all of those dynamics, if it's not feeling good, that's, to me, that's feedback that we need to respect and pay attention to. Something is not right.
Yeah.
And it usually has a lot to do with belief systems.
Mm. So,
Mhm.
one of the beliefs that comes up a lot is women that have been in affair relationships, when they've been dating someone that's married, or in a relationship with someone that's married, they suddenly have a fear, do I trust love? Like, can I trust them to be faithful? And constantly attracting something that is emotionally up and down, how can they begin to
Mhm.
start trusting that they can attract healthy into their life?
Well, I think it's difficult to trust other people and to trust life in general if we don't trust ourselves.
Mm,
So I think really, it begins with taking a little solitude, stepping back from the action and the
yeah.
things that feel often overwhelming, and sort of like going into cocoon mode and checking in with ourselves. And
Mm,
just the very act of doing that, of like pulling inward, is a signal to ourselves of like, it's protective. It's like, let me
yes.
pull myself out of the game for a minute and
Yeah.
let me listen. And that begins this kindness, this friendship, this relationship of what you would do with your child or with your friend. If you saw them walking toward danger, you would pull them back and be like, hey, 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 hold on a minute.
Yeah.
There's a car coming. There's
Yeah.
something I can see that you can't see. So when we do that with ourselves, when we say like, okay, I'm going to respect the fact that something in me is hurting, something's not working. So
Mm,
let me pull back from the situation instead of trying harder. Like, a lot of
yes.
times we push harder when what we really need to do is come
Come
back
back.
and take some time, which is also a signal of, I'm being generous with myself. Trusting yourself means trusting your timeline, trusting the timing of your life, and
Yeah.
saying, if this isn't working, I'm going to just come back into myself for a little bit,
Yeah.
and I'll know when it's time to go back out into the world and take action. But sometimes we need to pull back in and do some really deep listening and attuning to ourselves. That's what trust is really based on, in my experience.
Yeah.
It's that deep connection with self. And then once that feels more established, it's much easier to go out into the world and trust ourselves to read what's happening. So if
Yes.
someone's
I
treating us
love
in a way that
this.
we don't like, we're like, oh, I notice it. I notice
Mm,
it because I'm so in myself. I'm so aware of what I'm feeling
yeah.
that it doesn't miss me. I'm connecting with what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful segue into women will often have, or the audience that are listening will have that fear that they will lose themselves in the relationship, and that they won't be able to speak their truth. And that's a big fear.
Mhm.
How can we begin to start trusting in our ability to speak up and set boundaries, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
Hmm. Okay, well, I think that what gets in the way of us setting boundaries in our lives is fear.
Mm.
So it's really important to know what you're dealing with, right? So the issue is not that we're struggling with the boundaries themselves, usually, it's that we're afraid. So what we're really dealing with is fear, not boundaries, right?
Yes, beautiful.
So, and a lot of times when someone feels afraid to set a boundary, it's because they perceive that something's on the line that they could lose and they can't live without it. Like it feels
Mm.
high stakes. So we put up with really bad behavior in our lives and we don't set boundaries with people because we're afraid that if we start to say, no, I'm not available for that. No, that's not happening, that people will say, oh, all right, well then see you later. And then we'll be on our own. Like there's a
Yeah,
deep fear, I think, at the end of the day, if you trace it down to its root, there's this fear of being rejected, of being outside of the tribe, of being unwanted. And
yeah.
that keeps us in a place where we're willing to tolerate a lot of bad behavior. So
Mm.
when you talk about resistance to setting boundaries, what you're talking about is fear.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
if we do have that fear of rejection, being abandoned, loneliness,
Hmm.
how can we heal that fear within?
Mm. Well, I think again that that's all a representation of what's going on internally. So
Mm.
you can't, I just believe this very deeply. I don't think you can have things in your life that you're not giving to yourself,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you are not forging a relationship that's loving and kind and respectful,
Mm.
where you're listening and attuning to yourself and you have that self trust in place, you won't create it out there.
Yeah,
And for a lot of us, we have that backwards. We think that if we can secure the kind of relationship we want for ourselves out there, that we'll feel better in here, but it's the opposite.
yeah,
So I highly recommend, and I don't know of any other way, to be honest with you, I highly recommend that people take some time to be with themselves. And at first, it can be very frightening. But as you
yeah,
begin to face those fears and little by little do things by yourself, like for me, a big thing was just going out to dinner by myself. That felt really terrifying,
yeah,
you know, and it was something I just worked my way up to very gently, you
yeah,
know, like sometimes I would just go to the bar and I would make sure that I would eat at the bar, not at a table by myself in the restaurant. And I
yeah,
would make sure that there were people around me so I didn't feel like totally alone.
yeah,
And I began, as I calmed down, and I did this a few times, I began to like turn around, look around me and notice that other people are doing it too.
yeah,
You know, that you're not alone in your quest to work it out with yourself and have a healthy relationship with solitude. So maybe
mm,
that's what I'm getting at, is like a healthy relationship with another person comes after we have a healthy relationship with our own solitude. If we're afraid of being alone, then we'll continue to have relationships that aren't necessarily the right thing for us, you know?
yeah. Beautiful. Do you feel that that relationship with ourselves comes from practicing being alone and or also shifting our relationship with what loneliness and being alone means?
100%. Yeah, I think investigating what that word means for you is really important, what the word loneliness means, because
Yeah,
a lot of us conflate solitude and loneliness,
yeah,
and they're very different. And you can have a rich, beautiful relationship with yourself that's not lonely at all. It just doesn't involve other people. And that
yeah,
doesn't mean it never involves other people. It just means there's a part of your life that you hold sacred for yourself, where you're taking up space inside your own existence. And it isn't always about looking outward, thinking about what other people are doing, keeping your schedule jam packed with action and people and things to do. It's like developing the muscle to be comfortable with yourself is a
yeah.
really powerful tool to have. It's a
Mm,
really big deal. Hmm.
absolutely. It brings so much awareness and clarity uh,
Hmm.
to ourselves. So with this, you said you've grown up in a household of psychotherapists, psychologists,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and and you've taken the route of coaching. Can you tell us more about why you've done that? I know for like this loneliness healing, a lot of the work you would go down if you were doing psychology would be healing inner child traumas around that. Can you tell us more about your work, what you do, and how it differs with psychology and coaching?
Yeah. Well, so traditional psychology is really the study of the self. And I appreciate many aspects of psychology, and I definitely have integrated pieces of that into what I do as a coach.
Yeah.
But what I think a lot of us are missing when it comes to the idea of the self is that the self, I say the self is like a coin with two sides, and one side is the ego, and the other side is the soul. So
Mm.
if we're not talking about the spiritual aspect of who we are as human beings, then I don't believe we can have complete healing. Because when
Yes.
we're caught up in trying to heal the self and we're dealing with all the things that live inside the psyche, we're
Yeah.
missing all the stuff that resides in the domain of the soul. So
Yes.
when you bring both of those into the fold, when you look at a human being and you don't just see the self, the typical self stuff of who they say they are, of what they're identified with, and all that jazz, and you go a little deeper into, oh, what is your purpose? What were you incarnated in this form to do here on earth?
Mm.
What's your relationship to a higher power? Do you
Mm.
perceive yourself as being alone here on planet earth, or do you get nourishment and connection from something higher? So I can't really see people any other way at this point in my life. So I
Mm.
try to bring a depth to what I do as a coach, meaning I'm going to pull from all different buckets and hats, in order to bring a, a in order to bring what I think is most helpful in the moment. And I don't want to be contained within the parameters of therapists. That just never felt complete for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. For the women that are in affair dynamics and they're confused,
Hmm.
like so confused on where this is going. Do I hold on? Do I continue? Is he ever going to leave his wife for me? Or do I break it
Hmm.
off and create something different? Um,
Hmm.
how do we start to begin to tune into our soul's desires as opposed to that ego, the fear of what we will lose?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's really helpful to look at things from an energetic dynamic, like take all of the context out of who you are, of who the other person is, of what's at stake. Just look at the dynamics of energy.
Mm.
When we enter into an affair situation,
Yeah.
a lot of times what we're signaling is some level of fear of intimacy, meaning I'm only comfortable with this if it exists in a very specific way where I'm never going to be one-on-one with you.
Yeah.
And my experience, and I'll speak very personally because I've been in this situation personally,
Mm.
and I've worked with people who've been in this situation. And I think the message is the same. The message is, on some level, I'm actually not okay just being one-on-one in a
Mm.
committed relationship,
Mm.
because I either don't believe deep down that I deserve it. This was modeled for me somewhere along the line that this is what love looks like, or
Yeah.
the intensity of just having a person in a committed one-on-one way feels too much. And there's a
Yes.
myriad of reasons why that's true too. But
Yeah.
for a whole host of reasons, we're not actually comfortable. Even when people say it's what they want the other person to leave their mate so that it can be it can be the two of them. I don't always buy that, to be honest. And that's, I'm speaking very loosely because I don't know, the people that we're talking about directly, but I know in my own life,
Yeah.
having gone through this, that I think everything comes down to what A Course in Miracles calls the dichotomy of fear and love.
Yeah.
Everything comes down to either fear or love. And a lot of times the choices we're making that aren't serving us are coming from fear. So
Yeah.
if you're staying in a situation that's an affair,
Yeah.
and you're saying you want this other person to leave their committed relationship and choose you,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on there,
Mm.
right? Like needing someone to prove their love to you in that way. I mean, we could dive into that. There's a lot there. There's a lot there, right?
Yeah. 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 And often
Mm-hmm.
the dynamic shifts when uh, it's an affair dynamic, and when they do commit, if it does end up being a commitment where the affair partner does leave for you, can you tell us why the dynamic suddenly shifts and there's so much desire in this non-commitment, and then the dynamic, it often shifts? Can you tell us more about why that may happen?
So you mean in a situation where first you're in an affair and then
Yeah.
the other person actually cuts ties and becomes fully available to be in a relationship with
Commit.
you?
Yes. Yes.
Uh-huh. And are you saying that the person who participated in the affair as the other woman is now not feeling the same way? Is that what you mean by the dynamic is shifting?
Yeah, so there's a lot of passion, desire in this relationship where there is not full of a full knowing of where this is
Yeah.
going, and
Uh-huh.
this not full commitment. And then once it does become enter a committed relationship, at
Yeah.
times the dynamic of the love can shift,
Mm-hmm.
or the
Mm-hmm.
attachment can shift. Can you tell us more about
Mm-hmm.
why it may
Mm-hmm.
shift?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about like I can't handle scary movies. So if you take me to a scary movie, I always do this. And then sometimes I'll start to like just a little bit peek
Yeah,
through my
yeah.
fingers, right? So it's a way of me saying like I can handle this is how much I can handle. I can only look at a little piece of this, right?
Yeah.
And so when we are coming from fear, this is often true. There's only we can handle love, but only in a certain circumstance, only in a certain way, right?
Mm,
Like having a full on available partner on some level might feel threatening and overwhelming to us. And there's a whole,
yes.
like we said a minute ago, like there's a lot of reasons why a person might feel that way. But
Yeah.
what's important as a starting point is to understand that when you're in a convoluted dynamic where you're
Mm,
not really getting the love that you crave on a deeper level or the love that you deserve on a soul level, there is fear involved in that. And there's a way that you're having it, but not really having it. And
mm,
so once the person becomes fully available, it can feel very overwhelming. Like,
mm,
oh, if you're in an affair, you're not going to sleep with that person every night of the week.
mm.
They're not going to always be around or available. You might not always do the boring everyday things together. When you're together, it might feel very heightened because it's like, oh, we're together and we have this limited time. And so there's scarcity and there's urgency and there's all this stuff. And then if the person becomes fully available, it's like, oh, oh, okay, right? And that's when we might realize things about ourselves. The trick
Mm,
is to not get so wrapped up in the other person that we stop looking at what's going on for us.
yeah.
Why does it fall flat when the person is available? And what does that tell us about our relationship with intimacy and love and
Mm.
our comfortableness with receiving love and our worthiness and what we perceive as our worthiness on a subconscious level? There's a whole bunch of stuff there.
So much there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to
Mm-hmm.
just package this up with the if we're wanting to expand our ability to give and receive love and to
Mm-hmm.
expand that cup so that we can attract more healthy love into our life and not be afraid or threatened at our core when we do get that love. Do you have some tips or tricks that we could do to expand that?
Yeah, I do. I have a lot. I'll tell you what's been really helpful for me in my life.
Mm,
I think, first of all, a lot of us tragically do not have direct experience with safe love. We weren't raised in environments where love was safe. It wasn't modeled for us. A lot of us have suffered abuses and trespasses when it comes to love and sex and intimacy. So realizing that the things that have happened to you along those lines
mm,
were never your fault, and allowing yourself permission to have safe experiences with love. And for a lot of us, this means not beginning with another person. It can mean just spending time in nature and experiencing what it's like to feel connected to the earth,
mm,
to feel loved by a cool breeze going by, to feel loved by the way the trees are moving, to feel connected to all of that, which is
mm,
an expression of life and love in itself. For me, like I'm a huge dog person, so I love to spend time with my dogs. And for many of us, like the physicality of having a pet, of touching them, of them kissing you, of feeling accepted by them in an unconditional way, like that's a big deal. I don't think we should discount that. Like being with animals or
so
being with really young
therapeutic.
children, yeah, it's really therapeutic. It's like their hearts are so open, and so when we're around them, that rubs off on us. So
Mm,
just starting with things that are not as complex as dating or being intimate with another person, just taking it really down to its basics. So experiencing nature, experiencing animals, being around friends, people who make you feel safe, that's a great way to start like graduating it. And all the while, ideally, we're having some kind of daily practice with ourselves where we're either meditating, and that doesn't have to be like a formal spiritual practice, just like checking in with yourself, really like taking that very sacredly, like paying attention to how you're feeling throughout the day. For me, writing is a huge tool, digging into these questions of what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? How far back does this go?
Yeah.
What did I grow up knowing about love? What is my blueprint when it comes to love and intimacy and sex? And just because those things have been my experience so far, does that mean that it's inevitable that I have to repeat them? Or am I allowed to craft my own version and my own vision of what romantic partnership could look like in my life? None of this is a quick process,
Yeah.
But when we start doing it, we can build off the momentum of feeling like, oh, I'm starting to feel better. Like I'm not launching myself out there looking for something that I actually have access to within myself already. And that's the process, I think, of falling in love with ourselves, which is
Yeah.
really beautiful.
Absolutely. It is. And it can be a really healing and enjoyable experience for the women
Mm-hmm.
that are starting this process and it feels quite uncomfortable. And
Mm-hmm.
they want it, they want to do it, they want to do these practices, but a part of them wants to run and just maybe someone else, like maybe I just haven't met the right person and wants to run
Mm-hmm.
into filling that void as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to having that time alone. How can we face this when we do have that feeling of needing to just avoid the feeling of these practices and make them feel like more exciting,
Yeah.
more
Well, I
comfortable is
think
a
we
better word?
feel, what did you say?
How can, like, when the beautiful practices and when we're not used to them they can feel uncomfortable?
Yes, right. Well, I think going in knowing that it's going to feel uncomfortable, like when we're healing, when we're shifting things in our lives, it's not necessarily going to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's a signal that we're on the right path. Because if something, like if you have a hard workout, but you don't sweat and you don't feel exhausted afterwards, it wasn't a very tough workout for you.
Yeah.
So like you want to feel that you're growing and changing in a direction that feels hopeful and positive. I think when people feel a sense of success, it's because they're feeling a sense of hopefulness and change. Like they're witnessing a change within themselves that makes them feel like, okay, I want to try more. I want to
That's
try
true.
more.
Mm.
I don't want to put forth the idea that we move from being in what's often a codependent situation to being in solitude and it's all bliss. Like it's not. It's definitely not.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between hurting and feeling devastated and feeling sad and processing those feelings with the intention of I'm moving through them to something better versus just staying in the same circles and cycles where we're just going around and around not feeling good. So the kind of like pain and discomfort that comes with growth is
Yes.
different than the kind of pain that comes with feeling hopeless and feeling like I'm stuck in this.
That is so true. That is so
Yeah.
true. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
on and having these conversations. Can you tell us more about what you offer and where we can connect with you?
hmm So you can find me on Instagram at Mary Welch Official, and I have a website, marywelch.com. I'm about to release a book. I'm trying to release a podcast. So if people come to my website, they can sign up to stay in touch with me. They get on my mailing list, and that's a good way to stay in touch and aware of whatever I'm offering. I have a one-on-one practice as well. And again, all of that you can find either through Instagram or my website. So
Yeah, beautiful. And I'll
yeah,
put those links below so we can find you there as well.
thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
It was a
Appreciate you.
pleasure.